you're watching this video, you're probably in one of three camps. 1. People, mostly liberals, who like Bernie, support his policy. Many may describe themselves as a socialist, leftist, or progressive. People who think Chairman Bernie will lead the coming people's revolution. 2. Conservatives who hate Bernie and think he's too far left. Socialism is evil. He's a goddamn commie. Throw him out a fucking helicopter. Or 3. Far left socialists who think Bernie is too centrist, a reformist, a capitalist pig, and/or an armchair socialist who's ultimately harmful in advancing our glorious communist agenda. Now, if you fall in that second camp, I have an educated guess as to what you're saying. Bernie is a socialist. How is this video even called a left-wing perspective when Bernie is left-wing himself? Many people, even in the first camp, might be saying the same thing. And I'll give you some credit. It is a question that comes from ignorance, but it is a valid question, not a stupid question. It's been taken completely for granted that Bernie is a socialist in American discourse, and for good reason. He said he is one. In America. America hasn't had a truly socialist politician or even a major leftist movement in decades, and this guy came forward describing himself as a democratic socialist. So is he? What gives? I'll do this video in 4 parts to break it down. 1. What he isn't. 2. What he is. 3. What's his motive? 4. Should leftists vote for him? We'll start with what he isn't, which is a socialist. Before I go forward, I want to say something that I'll touch on more in part 3. I don't know Bernie's private beliefs. It's literally impossible for me to judge his personal, internal belief on something. So when talking about if he's a socialist, I'll be ignoring that, at least initially. I can only judge him on policy. So, are his policies socialist? Well, no. Let's define socialism really quickly for anyone watching who may not be familiar with the definition of the word as I'm using it. You know, the correct definition. For the people who already know, well, I'll make this as quick as I can. Socialism is a political and economic system in which the means of production are publicly owned by the workers themselves. Means of production, if you don't know, is an umbrella term that includes everything put into the production of a commodity besides labor. This includes factories, tools, resources, materials, computers, buildings, basically anything that makes something else that you eventually buy. There are authoritarian socialists who think we should use the state as a tool for the workers to control the means of production by nationalizing all industry and centrally planning it. And there are libertarian socialists who think we should do away with or drastically minimize the state and control the means of production in a more decentralized way, like through unions or councils. What all socialists have in common is an inherent opposition to capitalism and a belief that the means of production should be owned by the workers. Does Bernie believe this? Well, like I said, I can't really say that with any confidence. He may, but does he openly espouse it or push policy that would further this goal? No. Bernie calls himself a democratic socialist, a term that you might have been hearing a lot lately and almost always used incorrectly, including by Bernie himself. Democratic socialists believe in public ownership of the means of production, but unlike many Marxists, they do not believe in a vanguard party, a small number of politically educated people appointed to run things, but rather think that all people should control the party and economy democratically through voting. But because Bernie does not oppose capitalism, he is not a socialist of any kind, even democratic. It's really that simple. So what is he then? Well, this brings us to what he is, which is a social democrat, not a democratic socialist. Social democracy is the system that you see in many of the Nordic countries that Bernie likes to refer to. It's capitalism, but with a tiny dose of what some might call socialism. Why do I say it like that? Well, as I discussed, socialism is a very specific thing, which is in opposition to and cannot coexist with capitalism. But many in the modern day view socialism as the government doing stuff, especially when it benefits working people. Social democracy is capitalism, with things like universal health care, a generous welfare state, free universal education, public housing, high taxes with the aim of wealth redistribution, high economic regulation, etc. It does not advocate for the overthrow of capitalism or complete public ownership. It advocates for capitalism with band-aids. These things only prolong the existence of capitalism and cover its many flaws, but the flaws keep popping up, and we're running out of band-aids. But I'm going on a tangent. The point of this video isn't to preach about how shitty capitalism is. That's a different video. This video is about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders advocates for Medicare for all, aka single-payer universal health care. He wants to hold Wall Street accountable. He wants to raise taxes on the rich. He wants to make college free. These are all good things, don't get me wrong, but they aren't socialism. They're social democracy. In fact, we've had a president who did believe in these sorts of things and massively helped the US economy during his time in office. FDR. FDR was incredibly popular, and some would argue he is slightly to the left of Bernie, but he is touted as the savior of capitalism because his New Deal policies, while they redistributed wealth, something many consider a socialist idea, it was done to preserve capitalism by making corrections in an attempt to reconcile its inherent contradictions and keep it alive. If you ask most people, and especially politicians in a social democratic country like Norway or Sweden, if they are a socialist country, they will confidently tell you no. They have privately owned businesses, so they're capitalist. So if Bernie has the same principles as them, why does he claim to be a socialist? That question brings me to my third point. What's his motive? As I said, I can't read the mind of Bernie Sanders. I don't know if somewhere deep inside he hates capitalism and wants to behead every CEO and overthrow the US government as it exists now. Maybe he does. Indeed, in his youth and early political career, he seemed to have slightly more of a radical edge. He was a member of the Young People's Socialist League, the youth wing of the Socialist Party of America. He wrote an op-ed in 1972 saying that Congress needs to, quote, institute public ownership with worker control of the major means of production. In 1976, Sanders told the Bennington Banner that a sane society required that capital has to be controlled by the people. And more recently, he said on Meet the Press that he is, quote, not a capitalist. But something I find more interesting than whether or not he is a socialist in his heart of hearts is his use of the term democratic socialist. I ask again, but this time seriously, and not as a rhetorical device to transition to another point. If Bernie isn't a socialist, why does he claim to be one? I don't think he's stupid. Reading about him and his life and education, it is clear he is not ignorant of socialism or in general. As a student, he studied Marx, he majored in political science, he was a member of various socialist parties and groups, he's spoken intelligently on many issues. Does he really not know what socialism is? I don't think that's the case. I think he knows what socialism is, knows what the terms democratic socialist and social democrat mean, and is intentionally using the wrong one to change the narrative in American politics about socialism. Let's be honest. Bernie came forward and called himself a social democrat, most Americans would just go, oh, a Democrat, and not think twice about it. But if he calls himself a socialist, suddenly people on both sides are listening to him. And maybe they like him and maybe they don't, but that label sets him apart and makes him unique in the American political discourse. It gets headlines. It gets people talking. It gets them talking about not just socialism, but all the good, if maybe not overtly socialist policies that he pushes, like universal health care, free college, and so on. Some people on the left even theorize that Bernie is a secret far-left radical who is just using the current political system to try to not only make the lives of working people better under capitalism, at least marginally, but to also get socialism back into the discourse. America has had a huge aversion to socialism for decades, and Bernie wants to bring it back, even if it's not actually socialism, because it's a lot closer to socialism than what we have, and it's probably better. This brings me to my last point. Should leftists vote for him? And keep in mind I'm talking about the theoretical world in which he runs again in 2020, which is possible. But also I'm talking about any of his young, progressive, Our Revolution peers who have been entering politics since Bernie's campaign. If you're a liberal who already planned on voting for him and his peers, or a conservative who never would have voted for a self-described socialist, then awesome. This video might as well be over for you. Feel free to click away. This bit is for my fellow communists and anarchists. Comrades, I know voting is bourgeois democracy. I know we can't overthrow capitalism through the electoral system. I know that often, because of the Electoral College and voter suppression, that voting can feel totally pointless, even if you do believe in it. But here's the thing. I'm not an accelerationist. I think that capitalism is killing itself well enough, and that people will learn what's wrong with it given the proper education and the inevitability of mass unemployment in the face of rapidly increasing automation. I don't think we need to deprive people of their well-being to get them to understand why capitalism is fucked. I think that as long as we live in this capitalist system, which, let's be honest, is the foreseeable future, we need to institute things like universal healthcare and free college, because the best way the mass of people can overthrow capitalism is if they are healthy and well-educated. These aren't perfect solutions, but they are solutions, which we aren't getting from any other major American politician. Another example is that I believe that climate change is an imminent threat, and while the best solution to it would be the destruction of capitalism so that profit motive no longer takes precedence over the environment, that's not happening soon. So in the meantime, I believe in heavy regulation of industry to minimize the damage that we're doing. Republicans certainly don't believe in this, and as much as Democrats pay lip service to it, most of them don't do shit about it, because at the end of the day, the people writing their checks don't want them to. Bernie and his peers, because they have a socialist bent to them, because they refuse to take money from these massive companies that are destroying the environment, are genuinely committed to reversing climate change. Climate change is the single most pressing political issue of our time. If we don't elect people who are committed to heavy environmental regulation, then we won't have a planet left on which to spread our glorious communism. If Bernie and his ilk are the only ones who will do this, then we need to elect them. So, if you do vote for Bernie Sanders. He may not be a socialist, but in my eyes, he's the best we've got right now. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to following the teachings of our great leader and head secretary of the Revolutionary Forces, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.